We all here?
Give it a moment.
All right. It's recording, right? It's live. Somebody may need to check Facebook Live and see if we're on.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good. Okay. All right. And I hope people online can hear us very well. We'll try to project as much as possible. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another budget conversation. My sincerest apologies for being late. This is my fourth event of the day, and so trying to get here and set up and all of that just took a minute. Plus, as everyone knows, I'm technologically challenged, and so I'm part of the old generation, pen and paper. So when it comes to technology, it takes us a minute. I want to start by thanking Mike Lacey for helping set this up. Mike was on my conversation last year. Mike is one of my go-to expert on community safety definition and everything, and so I want to thank him for helping set this up and also getting us the space. I want to thank Trinity Community Commons for hosting us, for allowing us to use this space for these very important conversations. And this amazing, wonderful talk show panel here that are spending the Saturday with me. You all are amazing, incredible. You do wonderful work in the community, and I'm so humbled and honored that you spending some of your time with us. So we're not going to take too much time. I'm going to start from my right with Mr. Coopin of Coopin and Associates. Is that it? If everyone will please briefly introduce themselves. We all know each other, but to the folks that may be watching or watch later, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Councilman Jacob Coopin, and thank you, Councilman Suara, for hosting these and doing these, and honored to be invited. Councilperson for District 19, which is the interstate loop, so Midtown, Broadway, Gulch, Germantown, Salem Town, and then into the East Bank. I'm really excited to talk about a very important topic today.
I'm Andrew Crinks. I am with
Andrew, what does safety mean to you?
Yeah, so safety to me, the shortest way I can usually put it is that all people's needs are being met and that we're equipped with ways to respond effectively to the diversity of needs that people in our communities have when issues arise. So it's both a matter of prevention and like situationally appropriate response, like to the various things that arise. And building off of what others said, I very much resonate with what others said. In the organizing spaces I've been in with the People's Budget Coalition and beyond, a question people will often ask as a kind of creative prompt is, imagine yourself in a completely safe situation or environment. It's often like a meditative exercise too. And you ask people like, what comes up for you when you're invited to think about safety? And inevitably it's things like, at my grandmother's house eating a meal, I'm with my friends around a campfire, I'm with my kids doing this, I'm out in nature. So it's like people's bellies being full, relationships, needs being met, having a sense of belonging and care. And these end up being the basic ingredients of what safety is all about. You never hear people though say, I think about a jail, or I think about police necessarily. Like the first thing when you ask like on an existential level, what is safety, are those type of basic human functions. And so, kind of as Councilmember Preti was saying, that there's a kind of the inverse of safety is when people's needs are not being met. Like that's what creates all kinds of problems in communities. People are not, their own needs are not being met, and often those being without what you need leads you to end up in situations where hurting others becomes more likely than it would be if your needs were met. And so, yeah, safety is having needs met, absolutely, and guaranteed, and not just met at a baseline, but met so that you can thrive, not just survive, as Pastor Tucker was saying. So those are the roots of safety to me.
Jacob.
I don't know how I'm going to follow that. That was incredible.
Yeah.
What they said. No, I appreciate it. And as Andrew was saying that example, I was thinking through it, and I didn't picture police or a jail, or I pictured family, and I pictured my wife, and so I pictured emotional safety, right? So I think safety is multifaceted, multi-layered, and there's the feeling of safety and the fact of safety, right? And we hear a lot about the data, crime going down, or this number or that number, but it's also about a feeling. It's what makes you feel safe, what makes me feel safe, and that's different for different people. I think as Councilman Suarez had said, in the fuses and license plate reader conversations, both sides of that conversation I've heard say, well, this is going to make me feel safe or make me feel unsafe. And I think that's a microcosm of safety being different for different people and feeling different for different people. And it's important to me to bring that together. And I think that, kind of like some of the others have said, basic needs being met, bellies full, roofs over heads, things to do, right? Those are the fundamentals of life. And so if those aren't met, you can't get to the full safety picture, and a lack of safety then creates more lack of safety. So I think, and it's important to me to find middle grounds, right? If different people are saying, I want to feel safe, and then the topic in front of us is something that we don't agree on whether it makes safe or not, well, maybe there's something else out there. And I think a great example, I'm really proud of our council and my colleagues, was a resolution requesting more traffic enforcement, but it was worked on with the Minority Caucus. It was focused on non-pretextual traffic enforcement, but rather specific safety, reckless driving and drunk driving. And I think Brenda said earlier, part of safety is feeling like you can go for a walk and be outside and not get hit by a car, right? So that's an example where a diverse group of people came together and I think found a path of, here's something that we can all get behind safety. So I think that's really an important effort and important work to be done.
Thank you. So as everybody is talking, and I try to make the conversation to be individual, I try to. After Pastor Tucker spoke, I was like, what does it mean for you? But in all of your responses, the common thing that I found was not just individual, but community. What I hear is relationship. What I hear is belonging. What I hear is, I was trying to write in the families, right? That's what we all, and this is a very diverse group. I decided to ask each one of you that, to be able to see if there's a common theme in how we all look at safety regardless of what part of the city we live in, and that's what your responses show. So I'm gonna go to Jeff. Would you now differentiate for us? I guess the question that I want to ask you specifically is, what is the difference between public safety and community safety, right?
Yeah, so I think whenever people oftentimes talk about public safety, it's a conversation around policing and how can we enforce the laws that are on the books and prosecute those who committed crimes. And I think that the conversations around public safety are oftentimes reactional as opposed to being proactive. It's reacting to a situation where somebody has already been victimized. And I've said this numerous times, is that one of my goals through the policy work that we do is to work to make sure that we are actually investing in the things that we know prevent crime, so a person doesn't have to even show up in court. Because by the time that a person is arrested and the case is prosecuted and the victim has to show up to court, it's already too late. I want to make sure, and so going back, I think oftentimes that conversation about public safety is really a conversation about the way our criminal legal system operates and how those laws are enforced. Whereas public safety is, whereas community safety is truly more geared towards those things that we know prevent crime and provide people access to resources as a preemptive measure before anybody is ever a victim of a crime. So that's really the way that I think about and the way that we gear the conversation when we're talking about public safety versus community safety.
Thank you. Before we go more into it, I think I would be remiss if I don't talk about the recent issues that happened, the recent ICE raid. And like I said in the beginning, the people that were in support of it are saying that, no, we need to do this because it will keep us safe, right? And even when DHS sent their response, we'll leave it like that, they said they got criminals off the street, really, really bad criminals, and they make it as part of safety, as a way to, I don't want to say confuse, but anyway. So Brenda, as part of the remix, talk to us about what happens. If you can address the DHS claim that this is about safety and those things like this, does it keep us safe?
Yeah, I mean, I think what, and just to recap what we know to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page. On May 3rd, Tennessee State Police, along with ICE, started a public safety operation that targeted Latino communities in South Nashville and like Gallatin Road. For the following week, they made over 500 stops and detained 196 people. They have not released the names of who all they detained. There's no public list of who they got. So this is very much just what they're saying. The people that they detained were being stopped for things like their window tint was too dark, a DoorDash driver who was just at a traffic light. There was a lot of bullshit reasons. Just to call it what it is, this was 100% racial profiling that was targeting the Latino immigrant community. That is like following the rhetoric of the federal administration or the Trump administration under the guise of public safety. It is an absolutely misstep and mistrust for Tennessee Highway Patrol to show up and participate in these activities, and absolutely shameful of what they did. They were riding out at night at 2 a.m. in the morning with their faces covered, pulling people over. It is absolutely shameful what they did. I think, honestly, from my perspective, we cannot trust what DHS is saying because they have not been transparent about any of these operations. They have not released the names. We don't know where people are. We don't know who they took. They can say like we have X amount of people and we targeted for these reasons, but the stories from the people on the ground is that they were just pulling people over. And this whole criminalization narrative is completely false. I mean, you do a dragnet operation in any part of the city, you're going to pull people with criminal backgrounds. And again, they're not even being transparent about what a criminal background is. So like, why would we take their word for it? I think they're playing on people's fears of like public safety, of like wanting to keep their family safe, and pulling this narrative that they're like targeting criminals that are violent and are causing harm in our communities. But like one of the cases of like Edgardo, who's been in Nashville for 30 years, he's a active member of the Catholic Church, who just got picked up on his 55th birthday, the night of his 55th birthday. There's Fanny, another local Catholic church member who was also picked up at the ICE facility. So these are just straight up attacks on a working class community, the working class people like of Nashville who also put in their labor to make our city grow, and a massive misstep to call it like public safety. I think. For the people who are like, well, this is what's going to work, I heard this from Marisa Franco from Mi Gente that like Trump has sold a can of goods that deportation is going to lower people's rent. And it's not, that's not going to be the case, right? And so people, are hopping onto this bandwagon, which we hope they also hop off because they feel like this is the thing that's going to make their life better, but we know that's not going to be it.
Wow. I was just going to say, I want to add 3 quick points to that. The first one is the operations that we saw from THP and DHS and ICE absolutely undermine community safety 100%, because there is a growing institutional mistrust in Black and brown communities. So what we're going to see as a result of this are that these communities are now fearful to call the police if they actually need help with an emergency situation. So that's the first point. Second point is, if you look at the statistics, immigrants commit crime at a lower rate than natural-born citizens. That's just a fact. And third is that, in my opinion, these detentions were unlawful. Because to even stop a person in a vehicle, there has to be reasonable suspicion that a person has committed a crime. And the course of their investigation was essentially, is this person brown and do they speak English? And that is the reason why they were detained. And so in my opinion, all those detentions are 100% unlawful and don't rise to meet constitutional scrutiny, but that's,
And I'm going to add one more to everyone that is watching. I did put something on my Facebook page. The numbers doesn't add up either. I think calling it public safety and saying that you got a lot of criminals off of the street when you could only name 5 out of 196. There's a problem. They were only able to name 5 hardened criminals, which is about 3% of the people that were arrested. And then they said 95 people, this is their words, have prior convictions or they have pending criminal charges. So pending criminal charges mean that they don't even have the convictions yet. So in that 95 could possibly be the 5 that they already named, and the 90 have pending criminal charges. And then even if you give them that 95 people have criminal charges, just even give it to them. What about the 101 that didn't have anything? And so to be able to call it public safety, to be able to say this is getting criminal off the street is just a rhetoric to play into people's fear of, oh my God, we need law enforcement to be safe. I think it's very important for us to be able to clarify that, because if they want to use data, they want to use numbers, we know how to interpret numbers, and their numbers are not adding up. Pastor Chaka.
If I could just add to what you just said and what Councilmember Preptine said earlier, I think this incident is a great example of the difference in community safety and public safety. That public safety is expecting X amount of fires, X amount of car wrecks, X amount of whatever, and preparation for that. Community safety, on the other hand, is all those other things. So when you want to call this a public safety initiative, it destroyed community safety to the point that I find it interesting that Steve Smith's restaurants are having to close their kitchens. You know, when a lot of the hypocrisy that we use in our political rhetoric, if it's even before we talk about race, class has to be considered in community safety because there are different needs. One class idea of community safety is I don't want certain food threatened, poor housing, all these things show up, which help add to this, as you say, this feeling of being safe. Well, I don't hear a lot from the political machine saying over and over and over that crime is down. They don't say it. It's not being said enough. It's not being said enough by the chief. It's not being said enough by others in these roles that we pull some of those community safety issues over into the public safety realm by criminalizing poverty. Instead of dealing with the poverty and the systems that set it up and sustain it and that actually are profitable off of it. So you're creating what now, instead of dealing with what we collectively create, we criminalize. I go on and on.
Lord Almighty, we talk about community safety last year. And depending on who you're talking to, it means different things and all of that. Why did you start it? What was the purpose of it? And what did you learn from that convening? Because my understanding is you have different people from different sides. Did that change? What did you get out of it? And don't be a politician, don't talk strong.
I want to be all gracious to be part of it. Welcome others to join as well. Response to the Fusus and the license plate reader technology conversations, and I heard some folks say resoundingly, "I want it." And when I pushed on why do they want it, it wasn't because they had some nexus of that technology to the result. They had a result they wanted, and however they got to the result, they got there. And then vice versa, I had many folks that said, I absolutely don't want it, it's going to make me less safe. And I was kind of thinking through as we went through 60, 70, 80, 90 days of it, what's our plan, right? What's our plan? What's our true north? What's our guide to get to public safety and community safety? It felt like we were kind of picking some random pieces and trying to go down that road without understanding, or at least I didn't understand how it all fit together. And as I started to dig, I learned that the chief has his community safety plan. And we've got the Office of Youth Safety, and we've got, Rough Incident. We've got all these different pieces operating in their own space without being stitched together. And so I got curious about, what do folks in the community, what do folks who are engaged in this work feel about it? What do they want to understand? And what would it take to really do the work and pull together some sort of a plan that we could then be actionable on? Again, back to the traffic work we did. How do we find that path in the middle that gets to safety, that feels like safety to many, many people? And so it's been really great meeting. I think one of the big things that we've heard it here today, one of the big takeaways is trust, and how important trust is, or the lack of trust is, in these conversations. So, it's an ongoing effort. We're trying to get somewhere we can create the guardrails and guidelines for a report and a study into these efforts. But it's really been a powerful and meaningful conversation.
Thank you. So, you talk about some of the things that we've done around community safety. The Office of Youth Safety is a new initiative that we got. The RAPA Institute funding is something that we've done. We've done the REACH program, right? The Partners in Care that actually allows mental health professionals to write the police. So Andrew and Brenda and maybe Pastor Talk, I want you to chime in into this and look at, we've done some things, but are we doing enough? What are some of the things that we're not doing that we can still do? And even the things that we're doing, are we really addressing this as we should?
Yeah, there's so much more to do. I mean, to echo what you said, first of all, the programs that we do have are very much worth lifting up as models to celebrate and emulate. Certainly the Office of Youth Safety, shout out to the folks who made that happen, to all the other organizations that you mentioned and ones that you didn't mention. That is really crucial work that is the seed of what could and should be much more. If you think about, at least in terms of question of money or public funds, how we allocate money to one thing or another. Right now, it's like crumbs on one side and a great feast on the other in terms of how we fund public safety is the abundance of resources, and community safety is, you ask for 10 million, but you get one. And you ask for this and you get a little bit of it. Whereas on the other side, you ask for this and maybe we'll give you some extra too. So, there's a great disparity in how we resource these things. And also it's important to note, I think, that if we have an expansive definition of community safety, where, as Pastor Tucker said, it's a state, it's a condition of well-being and people's needs being met, having an abundance of programs and practices and mechanisms and skill sets for responding effectively. And that's one thing I want to lift out real quick too, is that I think that community safety is about prevention. And then I think it's correct to say public safety is often about reaction. But I want to say that community safety can also include response. If you think about the difference between reaction and response is a little bit more thoughtful. It can be situationally nuanced, depending on the situation. Whereas what we have now is a one size fits all to a variety of problems that emerge. And so I want to maintain space for community safety to also include response that is nuanced and thoughtful about the situation that it's responding to. But I wanted to say that there is a great deal of community safety work that's already happening that maybe doesn't even consider itself to be community safety work, meaning the work of providing housing for all people is a part of safety. The work of meeting all these different health and education and transit and all these other needs should be understood as a part of community safety, because it's a part of that meeting of needs, therefore part of preventing harms from arising in the first place. And then additionally, there are lots of groups that are very grassroots, very shoestring, very maybe not even funded at all in the community, where people are doing community safety work in a very ad hoc, improvisational way in their communities through the relationships that they build and the trust that they build over time. And it's just that we don't recognize that as creating safety, and we don't fund it as such, but we should. And so I think that there is so much that could be done because there's so much that is being done across the country already. There are a multitude of models, and one resource I would point people to is something called 1 Million Experiments, which is a kind of essentially a Rolodex of experiments in community safety that are taking place around the US and beyond. From mutual aid efforts to community-led response to emergency crisis situations to travel funds for people who are vulnerable to police attention, different kinds of things like that. And so there's an abundance of models out there. And I think that what I want to really encourage us to think about is not necessarily what can Metro come up with to fill in the need for more community safety, but what does the community already know and what does the community already do? And what does the community identify as what is needed? So I'll just plug now that the National People's Budget Coalition, what we're pushing for, and I can talk more to it later, is for funding for a couple of positions to start to engage that, to start down the road of how can we develop a safety plan that is very holistic and all-encompassing. And we recommend very much that begin with engagement with the community, not end with the community. Oftentimes, when, no offense to the representatives here, but in general, when Metro comes up with something, they will finalize it and then say to the community, hey, is this sound okay to you? And then say, okay, well, we're going to do it regardless of what you like it or not, maybe we'll revise it a little bit. But starting with communities in a very thorough and embedded way, through the relationships that already exist in communities, is really the way to start conversation, because that's where, if community safety is not a one-size-fits-all, but it's a set of responses, a set of provisions and things like that, then you have to go to where different communities have different needs, as has been mentioned. And one last thing I want to, two more things about the program that are related to this is, one is, I really want to encourage us to think about safety that is at the expense of others should not be considered safety. So safety that is called, or activities that are called safety in the name of safety that actually create vulnerability for other people. Safety that's at the expense of somebody else. It's not actually safety even for the person who thinks they're benefiting from it, because it's framing safety in terms of taking something away, namely a person, taking people away from communities, taking them away to on a bus to Louisiana and out of the country, or to the jail, or wherever else, as opposed to, safety is about adding things, not taking them away. And so safety that's at the expense of others is not really safety. And it's actually, even for the people who think that they're being run, the bad guys are taken out of that image, even they are, in the long run, made less safe by it, because we're creating communities that are fractured, where people's needs are not met. That eventually will come back around to hurt the people that think they're benefiting from that kind of safety. Sometimes people from
old, and then they get don't cooperate with eyes, but it's very much just like you're that is what's going to happen. And we need to put a stop to that. I think we need to look at decriminalization as well. It's like a very important topic for a lot of the undocumented access to driver's license. There could be a way to figure out how to decriminalize that so it doesn't get so people don't get put in the system, especially for living there and establishments that don't have access to this documents because of that. And also other ways that we can decriminalize and other things that people are getting picked up for small things that just don't need to that pipeline. And I know there's other organizations that are working on that, and I know that there's other cities. I think people. I think the other part is that we really need to like the tax rates. A lot of churches. There's a restaurants and we're only good for a labor force. Bricks by bricks. And so really need to bring it into the conversation, especially into what safety looks like for different and like in that conversation because
about the programs that we can do. But I want to say, and that are not immigrants that live in those $1 million constituency. And when we're talking about communities, we're not talking about just one community, but national global, right? Because I think it's the feeling that's just to move. That's what about us, everybody's thinking about us. And I don't want that this conversation to be framed as such. The whole point of this conversation is how do we make a safe community where everyone feels safe, but it's not at the expense of another. So as editors, as a pastor, as all of that, what are some of the programs realistically that we can look at in Nashville, in addition to the ones that we have? That I know, that's why I asked you. That's why I'm thinking.
I'm gonna take a couple of bites at that question. I'm gonna take a couple of bites at that question. On the one side, I think that the political apparatus has to retool what you're more of than not. Those who are greater resource have unfettered access. And to that point, I'll say, I really appreciate Mayor O'Connell's statements that were more about community safety, public safety. When, you know, and I'm trying to paraphrase, it's, you have the legal side of this, but what he was really pushing on, saying on the community side of this, that in you being legal, in your way of saying you're legal, you created distress in the community, not only in the family, in the employers. This distress of people are now, for all intents and purposes, disappeared. And then you expect us to go on like everything is okay while you're doing this legal work over here. So I think as the political structures that exist, it's going to take a retooling. I'm encouraged even by this housing plan, but it's going to show up at you all's feet, whether or not it gets life or not. There are some things in there that need to happen, but if you don't have the political courage to vote sometimes, and maybe even against what your constituents say they want, which only protect the status quo, all you younger children. You actually perpetuate the systems if no one is trying to find out why our children are hungry. Because if you find out why children are hungry, then you don't have to have the program of feeding kids. So I think that tack, because again, as I said, community safety is a state of being. And it's a place that creates this idea of peace, a lower anxiety, a sense of contentment, which, yeah, programs can do that, but I think what has to drive it more than anything else are the authorities. They will either help it or hurt it in how the authorities respond, even to what a community safety plan is. If the authorities don't want to know from community what makes them safe, then whatever you produce, it's going to be lacking the information that you need. And there are some communities, when you even make that solicitation, you have to know that some communities you're going to have to go to. Some communities are not going to be able to do the QC code and the QR code and go online and blah, blah, blah. Some are going to have to be walked through that. Some are going to have to make you feel safe, and someone verbally does that. Well, we know that. But if the only opportunity is through the QR code, then you, I think, make a cognizant choice. I want to hear the rest of it. Here it is. If you got something to say, this is how you got it. It's that sensitivity, because the community safety plan, yes, it's overall, but it also considers the various demographic and community that exists within that community. And some of what they need, someone else may not need.
Wow. Wow. I do want to say to watching, if they're still there, and the panelists, I know it's after 4, but if you all would indulge me to go a little bit longer, because we started it for our technical issues, if that's okay with everybody, I want to be very still. Thank you. Andrew, because you are people, I wanted to ask you specifically, and I know you've given me some thoughts in terms of community safety programs. And one of the things that you mentioned is that we are doing some programs, yes, but it's not so much about all that we're doing, but how much we're funded. That is a fixed one side is the one, and then there's a coming on the other side, or what do you call it?
Or crumbs.
Crumbs on the other side. And so when we're looking at these programs, in order for it to be impactful, meaningful, to the point that we all see the effect of it, what are we talking about in terms of funding?
There's a couple of ways we could answer that. One thing I want to start with is as a preface to situate, this conversation once again, as I did with the feast and crumbs metaphor. It's just that we heard that crime is apparently down. Meanwhile, in terms of new funds for community safety programs that are existing, or that are just been formed, for instance, or that are asking for more money, that there's not been any promised yet, that still has to be a fight to get, more money for the Office of Youth Safety and other things like that. And so there's the question of the funding for the different programs. Right now, I know that I think that meanwhile, in terms of new funds for the community safety programs that are existing, or that have just been formed, for instance, that are asking for more money, that there's not been any promised yet, and it still has to be a fight to get, more money for the Office of Youth Safety and other things like that. And so there's the question of the funding for the different programs. Right now, I know that I think that it's as accurate to say that the organizer, Southern Movement Committee, and others behind the push for the Office of Youth Safety asked for 10 million, and they got 1 million, 750 specifically for the Office of Youth Safety, 250 for restorative justice programming in Napier, and so there's an ask for the rest of that 10 million. So that's one thing. Another 9 million. There are other programs. I don't know off the top of my head about like what RFA and other groups get or are slated to get. But I know that if we want to talk about doing the work to assess what's going on already, to assess where the gaps are, where they can be filled, to explore opportunities for expanding the ecosystem of community safety that already exists, and filling it with new resources and new programs, then a good place to start is at least to do that work of, can we fund a couple of people to commit for a year or 2 or 3 to a landscape analysis, an analysis of what could be done, and then engagement with community to figure out what should be done in order to create a plan that is robust and thorough and multifaceted to look at what a community safety orientation for the city could be, that is coordinated, that is well-resourced, where there's metrics in place, where we know what we're looking for and how to measure its success. And there are the Office of Youth Safety will be doing that to some extent with the youth side of things, but we can also think about that in terms of for all residents as well. And so that, very specifically, what the People's Budget Coalition is proposing would be about $500,000 for a couple of staff. I will say that the People's Budget Coalition, this comes from us, from our member-based organization. We suggested that potentially live in a place like the Metro Human Relations Commission because of the work that they have done. And I want to emphasize again, that comes from our organization, not from them. And so, we could have that discussion about where it lives. But I think that starting there would be a good way to create pipelines for there to be more funding and resources that is backed up by, here's a coherent approach, a framework, a set of frameworks. Think about it as an ecosystem as opposed to a little bit of money there, a little bit of money there. But think about it as a holistic way of approaching things that is not just reactive, but is thinking in terms of prevention and trauma-informed response. So yeah, I can say that it's a pretty tiny amount. It'd be less than 0.03% of the whole budget would be enough to give us a couple positions to do this work of laying this out by engaging communities, departments, stakeholders, policy experts, etc. So.
MHRC. MHRC was mentioned. When I do a speaking, what came to my mind was the new housing strategy that just came out. I know that for many years we're talking about we need a strategy that needs to look at how we do housing, We need a dashboard of our land and things like that. We've been doing different things, but can we look at the entire city, including our zoning and everything? And that's how this housing strategy study and all of that came to be. And so I think it's something similar where I think that's what I'm hearing, that we're doing bits and pieces here, but we're not looking at everything. We're doing something for the youth here, we're doing something for mental health here, but there's a whole lot more that community safety encompasses. So what does that look like? What is the holistic way? What are the programs? Is that something that can live in MHRC? Would MHRC be able to play a role in this space for this conversation?
Well, I think the record would show 2017, under the previous executive director, Mel Fowler Green, there were public hearings around community safety. I held them in 2022 held 4 different ones. I think Dr. Creeds actually spoke at one of those. Jamel, so this is,
So we've been talking about
that's
this.
this for a long time.
Okay, so then what we need to do now, because I mean,
And then to even get something started off the ground as Dr. Creeds is proposing, one of the things for us is awareness and education. Another part of what we do is good research, inclusivics, the 3 housing reports that sounded the alarm about, that no one listened to over 10 years ago, about the taking of the lower class properties was only going to last until they come for the middle. No one listened. So you look at these areas in Nashville that were gentrified first, to where they don't even look like their neighborhoods now. Now, they're in these places that were not part of that 10 years ago. And now everybody now wants to talk, because the middle class person now cannot buy a house. So all of that to say, yes, MHRC is committed to making Nashville a better place for everybody. But as Dr. Chris has put together his proposal, Nashville is over 700,000 folks, a huge land area, a class separated place. It would take some time to adequately assess such a large place, particularly with attention to detail with the various groups that make up the community. I think it's a worthwhile effort. But I guess my larger concern would be enough money to do it and to make sure you would do it correctly. It has to be quantitative and qualitative, I think. Because to me, over in the community safety realm, it's more qualitative than it is quantitative. It has more how I feel things over there. So I would hope that it would be well funded, understand that you don't get this done in 2 weeks. But if it's under FHRC, we're going to do what we think we have to do to protect the trust that we feel Nashville has entrusted with us.
before I move on, Mel did something, you did some community conversations. So you're not starting from scratch, you are updating. Do you still have those work or the recommendations of those work as a starting point? Because that's where I will go. If I think we've already done it, then why would we need to do something new? Now, 2017 is different from 2024. And so there will be update needed. But I just want to understand, because I don't want us to, we get into doing a lot of studies that we put on the shelf and nothing happens. And so if we've already done a study twice, how do we then take that and come up with action plan off of it? It's what I'm trying to get to.
Well, I actually read 2022 in preparation for this, which caused me to go look at 17. Some of the concerns are still the same, but I think what Dr. Craig said he could better do that is we held public hearings with various aspects of public actors, community boards, and individuals. There's another research-oriented line that has not ever happened, trying to count stuff, trying to measure things that I think is critically needed too. You need this part.
And then this is the next
And
step.
because sometimes it's this part that helps you determine what this other part, not trying to be critical of the police, but they do ice cream giveaways, all manner of what they call community stuff that is an expenditure of public resources that we all know that those things are not what's going to create trust in those communities. Now, we already know that. So why do we allow that? Why do we allow expenditures for that when we know that that's not going to make that happen? Because when you do, you tacitly say that it does help with that.
Okay, all right. Whoa, I don't know if there are questions online. I've not been able to, and my apologies if it look like, see if I'm looking at my phone. I've been trying to see, sometimes we do get questions and we do get comments online. People in the audience, question, thoughts, comments? Yes, sir.
I have a question / comment, because some of this I really enjoyed and some of this made me really angry, right? Some of this made me really angry. So like the last 6 months or so, we've been talking a lot about surveillance, right? We've been talking about LPR, we've been talking about FUSIS, we've been talking about all of these different kind of technologies in order to criminalize. We've been talking about guardrails, so it criminalizes other people but not us, right? We've been talking about all these things that still feed into like carcerality. Now, like we have, you know, like the federal government here, and we're like, wow, like how could we help? Right? Like that's what, like in the public health and safety, they're like, wow, we haven't like prepared for that.
Kind of where the idea for the task force came is, can I go deliver back to my constituents and others an actual solution to that problem that doesn't touch the surveillance tech side of the world, but does do community safety, does invest in after school and weekend programs. So I don't know if the discourse has changed, but I think part of my frustration has been that there has been calls for, I don't feel safe. And the response we continue to get is FUSIS LPR, FUSIS LPR, FUSIS LPR. And my thought is, you know, what else is out there? Surely there's more than just those two things, right? And so the tone hasn't changed, but I've been trying to kind of get that shift towards, again, community safety and public safety and how those come together, and how we can work together to find paths that do actually create long-term safety, right? We talked about the carceral system, and yes, in the short term, maybe that make a certain individual feel safer, but the long term, we know that these pathways create more gaps and more lack of safety. So to me, you know, I want to see, you know, more of a comprehensive look and approach that to Pastor Tucker's point, starts with community engagement, starts understanding what we know, what the community knows, and what we can work with to actually get to that goal that really everybody's saying, I want to feel safe. Right? Everybody's saying I want to feel safe. It's just the conversation then is, how do we get there?
Yeah, so I'd say similarly to Councilmember Kubin, a lot of the conversations in District 25 have been the same, because I've had conversations with folks who are very much in favor of surveillance programs and folks who are not. And I always frame that conversation just from my background as a lawyer of how can we achieve these public safety goals while protecting everybody's constitutional rights. because point blank period, regardless of your criminal history, of your immigration status, you are protected by our federal and our state constitution regardless. Having background, particularly in First Amendment and Fourth Amendment protections, how are we going about this where we're not intruding on people's reasonable expectations of privacy? Had a lot of conversations about just cameras being able to pick up a private conversation on which you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in, which a lot of folks, I would say, skew relatively libertarian, so that like framing it that way, it's like, oh yeah, like I do really want my privacy rights and don't want Big Brother intruding on that. And so really just having those conversations and seeing where they are at and providing them different framing, I think has been helpful for folks. But I still think that it's of a net negative for folks and for the way that we engage in public spaces. In my opinion, I think Citizens United is one of the worst Supreme Court decisions that we've ever seen. And so, lobbyists will reach out to me sometimes they don't. Oftentimes they don't, because just like folks know where my stances are on most issues because I talk a lot. And so, yeah. Who would imagine a lawyer that talks a lot, a lawyer and a politician that talks a lot? And so, I hear you, and I agree that money influences our politics too often. I think that there's two sides to that coin, because lobbying, I think, takes a lot of different forms. There are folks who are paid lobbyists who represent business interests, but like folks like Andrew who will come to council and lobby us on other issues that are more grassroots and community based, which I think is absolutely appropriate. I don't know if I'm directly answering the question just because, like, again, oftentimes lobbyists don't reach out to me all that much because they know where I stand. Because a prime example is whenever we were debating, it's probably a year and a half ago, right when we started on council this term, considering the new contract for tasers. The lobbyists reached out to me and spoke to me about that, and I voted against it because that's just where I landed, and wasn't necessarily influenced by their talking points. The issue, I think, lies with who are we getting to run for these seats, and who are we getting to be in these seats, and how are they going to be influenced once they get there? Because one thing that I will say for myself is that I was 100% transparent during the election about who I was, what I stood for, and which got me elected, and I've stood by those principles 100%. There are folks who 100% have a switch up. Prime example on the federal level, Senator John Fetterman, in my opinion, has done almost a complete 180. I don't know how we necessarily solve that, just because Citizens United is the law of the land right now, and that influence is not going anywhere anytime fast. But yeah, I think the main way of how we combat the undue influence of people's economic buying power is having people in these seats who are principled, who we know where they stand, what they stand for, and supporting them when the time comes.
Let us also not undermine the lobbying power of the citizens.
Yes.
Right? The lobbyists have time. They devote it to it. They can make calls 100 times a day. And so they're able to reach council people because that is their job. But I also want us to understand that individuals sending us information, giving your responses to the physics question, your question to the physics debate, your information are things that we're all using. People coming in and speaking against it. And you see that even though there were lobbyists working on it, it did not pass. And a lot of people were shocked that it did not pass. And that was the power of the people lobbying. And so let's not give up on that power. Let people continue to be engaged and continue to talk to their guys' neighbor. And don't just talk to the ones that I always say, I don't know why people are calling me. Because are you wasting your time? You know where I am. Go talk to somebody else. Spend your time and talk to the people that typically are not on that side of the
You
conversation.
gotta waste their time, so
No.
you don't have time to go.
Yeah, we don't have time. So save time talking to me. Go do.